Behind me is my Mark 5 Jetta with the inline 5-cylinder and the 5-speed manual. It's a pretty fun car to drive as is. However, the 2.5 liters on the Passats and the Jettas, both Mark 5 and Mark 6, they came with this engine cover intake design where basically the air filter sits on top of the exhaust manifold, which for warming up the car for emissions purposes is great, but for airflow, both for airflow, because it's like this thin engine cover, and for performance, it's not great. And so one of the most popular mods to put on these Volkswagens with the 2.5 is an intake. Literally any intake is better than the stock engine cover intake system. And so in this video, I'm going to be showing you step by step how I made my intake and how I made it have no engine codes. There are a couple of other YouTubers that I should give credit to. Zenosynes down in Texas, and then DubsDaily up in Canada. Those two guys, very, very good videos and very good comment sections. They do lots of Q&A. However, the issue that they both had, as far as I can tell, is that they both had an engine code come back, which isn't great because I live in a state that needs emissions, and you can't have an engine light on, which at first may seem pretty difficult. However, if you seal everything up correctly, then you're not going to have any issues. So let's get right into this. The first thing you got to do is take off the old engine cover. This is such a pain in the ass, it's not even funny. So there's 4 mounting points for the engine cover. They are little rubber grommets on screws basically, and you just go around each corner of the engine and you yank them off. If your engine's warmed up, this is so much easier. I make it look really easy in the video. However, if your engine's all cold, it's going to be difficult. Next, you're going to want to unclip both sensors. So the top sensor, it's just a little clip. You can use a screwdriver to twist it out, but be careful, some of the plastics are brittle. The next sensor you have to disconnect is the intake temperature sensor. This one you just have to lift up a little tab again. Again, you can use a screwdriver to twist it. And then to actually get it out of the manifold, you have to kind of pry at it from the inside. You don't even need the sensor at all. However, if you don't actually have it plugged in, you will throw a code, so you're going to need to use a screwdriver to kind of pry it out from the inside of that ducting. It's not really difficult, it's necessary. Next thing you need to do is remove the intake ducting that comes from the grill of the car into the engine cover. Those are just 2 little screws that you can unscrew and pop off. Some of you may have a cover, some don't. I've never seen a car that does have a little cover there, but some of them do. Next thing you got to do is remove a hose clamp that goes from the MAF to the actual intake manifold of the car where the secondary air is. I don't have one of those. My car just didn't come with one, and I haven't actually gotten any codes from that, interestingly enough, so that kind of shows that you do have some leniency in terms of sealing up the system. So after you get all those things done and you get the engine cover popped off, it's time to start modifying the engine cover. The first thing you need to do is take out the MAF sensor. If your car does not have a MAF sensor, do not even worry about this. I'll explain a little bit more about the difference between MAP and MAF sensors later. But if your car does have a MAF sensor, then you're going to want to take that sensor out. There's 2 screws. They're kind of difficult, and it's really easy to strip them. I know I used a screw gun in one of them, but don't do that. Just use actually a computer screwdriver would work really well for this. It has to be high torque, though. These are really torqued down. Once those are off, you can just pull the sensor out and then leave it to the side. We'll deal with that later. As a side note, you may need to remove the duct that comes from the grill into the cover because the screws are a little hidden. Alright, the next thing you're going to want to do is actually assemble your entire assembly before you even think about cutting anything. This is so that you can dry fit things, and so you know exactly where to cut and that you don't cut too little or too much of your secondary air pipe. If you're worried about cutting your secondary air pipe, I'm going to talk a little bit about that later. So basically you got to shove the MAF sensor, make sure that the direction is correct. There's a little arrow on the MAF sensor. You can also look that the part with the honeycomb should be on the side with the air filter. You're going to shove that MAF sensor right into the air filter. It's a little difficult to get in. I had to use a heat gun to heat up the rubber of the air filter, and then a little bit of dilithium grease. But after a while of prying it with a prying tool, a plastic prying tool, you can use a screwdriver too. It went in completely fine, and I'm not even going to use a hose clamp for that unless I run into issues because it's just such a snug fit. I guess I forgot to mention the kind of air filter that I'm using. I'm using a Spectre 3-inch inner diameter air filter. They make a bunch of different ones. I'm using the one with the closed top style. However, they make the kind you want is one with a 3-inch inner diameter and needs to have a rubber, I guess you would say, skirt on the other end. And then it needs to be like a reusable one, right? That's the whole point of this. The Volkswagen air filters are like $20 to replace, but with these you can wash them and do whatever you want to them. They're lifetime air filters. Anyway, once you get the MAF sensor into the air filter, you're going to want to put a coupler on the other side of the MAF sensor and push it all the way to the little lip. You're not going to want to go beyond the lip because that's where the sensor connector is. I know this may sound a little confusing, but once you're actually doing it, it'll make a lot of sense to you. So you're going to put one end of the coupler onto the sensor, and then the other end of the coupler you're going to want to put onto your 90-degree 3-inch elbow. I'm using Spectre brand. It does not matter what brand of anything you're really using as long as it is all 3-inch. For example, I'm using a Spectre air filter and 90-degree, but I am using just generic eBay couplers. I would recommend actually going with the generic eBay couplers because most of those kits will actually come with T-clamps, which are much better than like the hose clamps that use the screw to go up the thing with the thing. I can't really explain it too well. But I would recommend actually going with cheaper ones because the Spectre ones are about like $18 for one, and I bought 2 of them on eBay with all the clamps and everything for $12. And they're honestly exactly the same product, just a different brand. Anyways, now you're going to want to put your other coupler onto the other end of the whole unit, on the other end of the elbow, I mean. You're basically going to want to put it on halfway or until the coupler like reaches the elbow part of the elbow. And now this is the part where you have to cut your secondary air hose. However, so if you're worried about this throwing a code, not being able to pass inspection, basically, if you cut it, you can just put a coupler right back on it and you're not going to have any issues. As long as you do it right, of course. If you cut it wrong, but I'll talk about cutting in a minute. The next part in this is basically optional. However, I would certainly recommend doing it to avoid damage to your engine. So I removed the clamp from the secondary air that goes onto the intake manifold. I removed that, and then I actually removed the secondary air pipe, and I stuffed a rag down it. Now, the reason I did that is because you're going to be cutting this. Now, if you use a knife, you're not going to be cutting it. However, I'll show you in a minute. I used a drill to drill it in, and then I used a knife to cut it. But if you're going to be using a saw or something, there's going to be all these little fine particles that are going to go into your intake, and you don't want those going in your engine because there is no air filter after this. So you're going to want to make sure that nothing gets in there. So anyways, I shoved a rag in the secondary air pipe, and that is how I protected the engine from any shards of plastic. Next, what I did was I sort of angled the whole assembly with the air filter, the MAF sensor, and the elbow and all the couplers on. I sort of angled it to try to figure out what angle I want to cut it at. You can see in the video where I marked mine. However, I would not exactly recommend that. I would recommend fitting it yourself and seeing what's going to work for your car. Some cars have a transmission control module right in the way there, so you may need to deal with that. Next, I drilled a pilot hole with just a regular like metal drill bit, and then I used a combination of like some hedge trimmers, which didn't really work, and then just a box cutter, a very, very sharp blade on a box cutter to just cut it. It's a thin pipe, like you can squeeze it with your hand when it's all intact, and it's really not that strong, so you can just use a box cutter. After I had all that cut, I took my paper towel out, making sure to pull all the little shards from the drilling process out with it. And so after everything was cut and everything was nice and good, I fit the air intake assembly onto the secondary air pipe. And so after some, prying and stuff, I got it on. It's going to be pretty fiddly. You're going to have to mess around with it. You might have to move some things, twist some things. I actually did have to twist my sensor up a little bit because the connector was at not a great angle. However, in the end, it worked out. And so after I got everything in place, I torqued all of the hose clamps down to around 55 foot-pounds. Some of them I did a little bit more just because they were still going. However, I think around 55 foot-pounds is a good torque spec for these. It's a lot of torque, don't get me wrong. I have a half-inch torque wrench, and it was still good amount of torque. I think this is what differentiates my intake from the other guys' intake, is that I used torque wrench and whatnot. Not to say that what they did was anything wrong. I think just because I torqued everything down uniformly, I think that might have helped a little bit. I also used a different style of hose clamp than the other guys. I think that the T hose clamps are way better than the regular hose clamps. And I mean, if you have the kind that squeeze over, those are even better. However, I didn't have any 3-inch ones on hand, so it was fine. And so after your intake is finished, all you have to do is fire it up and hope that you torqued everything down correctly, or else you're going to have an engine light. I did not have a single engine light or any issues stemming from it, and I'll talk a little bit about the driving later. So all in all, this entire setup cost me like $55. The filter I bought used, but it was new. I bought it like used from a guy on eBay. I bought the clamps and the couplers on eBay, and then I bought the elbow new from a vendor on eBay. So everything was from eBay. Everything was very cheap. Anyways, that was a lot of talking. Thank you for listening to that. I hope that you can get some help out of this. But enjoy some cinematics of my Jetta, and then we're going to go on a drive.
Out by 16, we're dead in this scene, but together forever.
So how does the car drive now that it has an aftermarket intake on it? Well, there's a couple things to note. First of all, throttle response in basically all rev ranges except for like really down low. Below 2000 RPM, there's not much of a difference. However, in the higher rev ranges, there's a huge, not only more power, more torque, but there's also more throttle response there, which I think is just down to the fact that there is less intake ducting to deal with. Which, I mean, it improves the drivability of the car to a great extent, which is awesome. But another thing that happened that I noticed is that the rev hang, meaning when you let off the clutch, how does the revs behave? I noticed that where am I going? I noticed that increased a lot, actually. Not to the point where it was like annoying to drive, but to the point where I have to like adjust how I shift and how I use the throttle. So like if I wanted to shift into fifth right now, I would let off the gas and then put the clutch in, whereas before I'd let off the gas, put the clutch in. And that's just to let the revs drop, or so that the computer doesn't think that I'm still applying gas, because there was a little bit of delay. However, overall, this mod is probably the best mod that you could, I don't know where I'm going. This mod is probably the best mod that you could possibly do to these cars, especially the earlier ones that were underpowered, because they didn't tune them exactly right. So the earlier ones that were underpowered have way less power than, like, I think it's like a 30 horsepower difference. So if you add these, I don't know, maybe get 5, 10, 15 horsepower out of it, something like that, who knows. But also one of the benefits of putting on one of these intakes is that you can clean them easy, right? So if you wanted to clean your old intake or your old air filter, you'd have to go buy a new one. Whereas here, these Spectre, I mean, of course you have to get the right brand ones. What is going on? Oh, Jesus. Oh, you're coming to a complete stop and there's nobody around. And we are coming to a complete stop in the middle of the road when there is nobody around. Bet this is Grandma going for a nice drive up in New Hampshire. Okay. Anyways, overall, I would totally recommend this mod, even if you can't see out of your own windshield like I can. I would recommend this mod to anybody, especially people with the earlier 2.5s. And obviously you want to make sure that your engine light doesn't come on if you live in a state with emissions inspections like my state. I live in New Hampshire. We have to do emissions inspections, whatever, it's fine. So much for live free or die. So if you have to do emissions inspections, you're going to want to make sure that you really seal up your new system like perfectly. There really can't be any discrepancies in terms of little things, little bits of air getting in, because that will throw a code. Also, if you have too high flow of an air filter, so they make air filters that have a filter that not only have the cone filter, obviously, but that actually have that let air in at the end of the filter. So you have the filter out here, and then it lets air in at the end. Those will certainly throw you a code because there's too much air getting let in, right? The systems are designed to have a certain amount of vacuum pressure in the system, meaning like a certain amount of like pressure. It's like vacuum pressure that the engine sucks in. So if you have too high flow, like if you were to just take the air filter off, it'd be too much flow. The engine's not going to run right. Now you may get more power, but the engine might run lean or rich. Probably would run lean. So yeah, just a couple things to keep in mind. Anyways, that's all for today. That's all for today's video. I'm gonna link Zenosynes and DubsDaily's videos down in the description. There's really, really great Q&A. They did a good job answering questions, both of them. So if you have any questions about this, please go to their comment sections, check out both of their videos, watch their videos. They have a couple more tips that I may have not mentioned. But if you still have questions, I will answer all comments down in the description in a pretty timely manner. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you for watching. See you next time.